This is the Tabernacle Podcast with your host for the day, Martin Rizzi. And I got two friends with me today that I just got to admit I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with. This is a little bit different podcast for me because this isn't the, hey, we're just going to open up the Bible and walk through it. We're going to talk about some real life.
Well, we could. It might be weird, but
this would be a cool podcast, like just a cool Bible study.
Right.
Hey, I brought in two guys. You don't know them, but we're just going to do a straight Bible study. It won't be the first time that me and Matt have done it. But so these guys' backgrounds, they're unique guys, come from very different places, doing very different things these days, but there is a common thread that we'll see. First, I'm going to introduce my friend Matt Clark. Matt and I met through the Tabernacle some years ago, had the opportunity to work with him in a bunch of different capacities. He is currently a Michigan State policeman. Actually, one of my favorite claim to fame for him, I don't know if it's his favorite, is that he was the fourth oldest, if I'm correct.
Correct, yep.
Guy to go through the Michigan State police training. And there's been some older guys that have done it since, like you inspired some dudes. It was in the paper. I don't know if that's like the seal that you want to be known for, but it's real. So
it's there.
It's there.
How old were you?
I was 48 when I started, turned 49 a month into it, so...
Yeah.
Nope.
I'm just thinking to
That's a
myself,
hard no for me.
I'm 43 years old right now. There's no way that in 5 years I'm going to have it in me to try to go through what you went through.
I have kids that are older than a lot of the recruits that I went through with. So it's kind of
Wow.
strange.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
So Matt is also Fight Club OG, specifically to the Cadillac campus. Like he was part of the original Fight Club with myself, Ben Brown, a bunch of amazing dudes. Hopefully every one of them listens to this, just because a big shout out. That crew is still alive and well and kicking, and part of that launching team. Pretty intricate in just getting that campus moving. So that's been exciting. Now Caleb, I met much more recently through Lake Ann Camp. He is the program director of Lake Ann Camp. And in conversation, I was just like, man, you got a background that it's not like the typical Christian camp program director. I was like, what do you do? And as I remember it, you were like, well, I was in law enforcement. And I always love law enforcement guys because you guys introduce yourself about the same way pastors do. It's like, I'd rather not tell you what I do or did. But
We got
you
to be sure
in.
who we're talking to first.
Right.
Before we really divulge where we all came from. So
To be fair, I think you misread me entirely because you admitted it, and I was like immediately a little tense and nervous. But yeah, a former police officer in Nashville, right?
Yeah.
All right. And was there a specific title? Like, I don't know police titles. I'm probably the wrong guy to do this podcast.
yeah, I mean, I didn't do state police. It was local. So just, police. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So the common thread here is this idea of law enforcement. And as we were talking through this, like you guys' names came up. I think it started with after a conversation I had with Caleb, and I was like, hey, what does this look like? And then I was like, hey, let's get Matt on there and let's talk about what law enforcement, biblical law enforcement, what God's word's got to say about this. So we'll get there in a minute. We're going to look into kind of what Scripture's got to say about this and see how that reflects on what modern law enforcement looks like. And I'm sure there's some of it doesn't look like the way the Bible says it, just like everything else man gets hold of. But beforehand, I just confession here. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, the last time I sat in a small room with multiple police officers, it was not me interviewing them. It was them interviewing me, and it ended fairly poorly for me. So thank you guys for changing my perspective.
Well, Matt and I already talked about good cop, bad cop. Matt's going bad cop. I'll be good cop. Are we good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is different for me, too, because usually I'm used to sitting across from the table asking the questions.
That's fair. All right. Well, cool. So I get to play that. We get to switch roles today. I'm not the convict today, and you guys don't have to do the interview. So to be fair, when you do that, is it all recorded as well?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So that's normal at least, right? This is just going to be, if you guys end up at some point needing to fold me over the table and handcuff me, then...
Yeah. It's usually not this fancy. Usually it's in the front seat of my patrol car or, maybe at the post. So
Gotcha. That's much more where I'm familiar. Now, all jokes aside, like this is legitimately a strange moment for me because I feel like life has come full circle. So if you're out there and you have no idea my background, go listen to a different podcast. We explained that plenty of times. But this is a different role. So... I'm thankful that you guys were willing to do this. I know it can be a different thing to be able to talk about this, and we'll see where everything comes into. But I'd like to take a look at Romans chapter 13. This is a passage I think I'm very familiar with, and I don't always love because it's telling me what to do. And if I can be honest, that's probably why I got in so much trouble with the police before. I don't love it when I'm told what to do. It says this. Let everyone submit to the governing authorities. since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God. So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of one in authority? Do what is good, and you will have his approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. Many translations say, for he does not carry the sword for no reason. For he is God's servant, an avenger that brings wrath on the one who does wrong. Therefore you must submit, not only because of wrath, but also because of your conscience. So this is often that passage that we refer to: pay your taxes, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, do the right thing. What's interesting to me is, as I look at this is very specific to, we're supposed to do what is right. Now, it implies a righteous ruler, right? We know that this ruler that it's talking about isn't any man-made authority necessarily, but it is reminding us that God has put all authority in place. And I don't always like that. So my question to kind of kick things off for you guys is, when you read this and you've been on the other side of it, what does this look like in practice? What does it look like? Like, is it a little bit terrifying? Because I'm sitting here pointing at you going, you guys are the ones that he's talking about here when he says they do not carry the sword for no reason. You are God's servants. Is that kind of how you perceived it? And Matt, I know you were a Christian when you stepped into the police force.
Right.
I don't know. Were you when you started?
I was, yeah.
You were? Okay.
Yeah. I was saved when I was younger. I was 8 years old when I accepted Christ as Savior. So grew up as a Christian, grew up in a Christian family.
Okay.
But I was kind of like the black sheep of the family. So I was like, my parents and my siblings, they all went and did the teaching route and like Christian school and stuff like that. I was like, not for me.
maybe law enforcement.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm going to go the different route. So yeah, but I grew up as a Christian and in that world, and so when I started, I was saved. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, yeah. Let me go back a step because I jumped ahead a little bit. Matt, give us a little bit of your background as well. Like, fill in the gaps here, because we go kind of from this is what you do and this is where you're at. Right. But the backstory will help us have some context to kind of how this fleshes out compared to what you're doing every day.
Sure. As you mentioned, I was like 49 when I got into the state police, 48, turned 49 shortly afterwards. Been a trooper for just under 6 years. Law enforcement, different capacities, corrections, military police, like 26 years in law enforcement. So a huge portion of my life.
Okay.
I've got 5 kids, 3 grandkids, another one on the way. Live in Cadillac, as you mentioned earlier. And yeah, I'm probably just going to keep doing this as long as my body holds up, and physically and mentally. I'm shooting for like 9 more years, and then I think I'm going to call it quits.
Gotcha.
Probably do something else then, but it's not going to be anything with law enforcement.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to go ahead and say he's like 3 grandkids, and, as long as my body holds up. I happen to have seen how much you can deadlift, and I suspect that your body's going to hold up just fine for a while.
Yeah, well, a big thing in law enforcement I found is you definitely want to stay in shape.
Right.
Because I'll tell you, when you're on the roadside and you're fighting with somebody, even 30 seconds feels like an eternity.
Oh, my word.
So you want to be in the best physical shape that you can. Otherwise you're going to put yourself in a bad spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Well, cool. Thanks for a little bit of backstory. So let me make my question more concise. How do you feel about the fact that, as far as this passage goes, you would be God's servant wielding his sword? Like, you are who he's put in at some level. There are levels of rulers, level of governing authorities, but at some level, you are part of the machine in which God has put in place to protect and serve.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, like, how did you was there a point in which your faith, you realized that, like, hey, this is actually godly work? Or was it always kind of separate?
I don't think it was ever separate for me.
Okay.
I never lost track of the weight of going out there and having the ability to take life. That's a huge weight to carry. And knowing that if you're wrong, you're going to be in a heap of trouble. And it can ruin your life, ruin your family's life. I mean, I've seen it before. We've seen the news stories where things go south and it doesn't work out well. So I never took that for granted. I don't know if you did, Matt. I don't think that's something anybody does. There's a lot of gravity to that. And then also knowing that everything we do is scrutinized probably much more than I would say most any other profession. Everything we do is either on video. If we're not having body cam on, somebody has their
Somebody
camera
else
out
does
and they're
all the
watching
time.
it all the time.
I go up to cars sometimes and, I look in the window and ask for their driver's license and
already got
there's
it
the
up.
cell phone and they're recording me already.
Yeah.
Happens
It's
a lot.
got to be wild. Like, this is a fairly recent development, right? Like 30 years ago, 20 years ago, like when
Yeah,
I was
have
getting in
cell
trouble,
phones, right.
I wasn't like, hey, I'm going to record you
Yeah.
while you're arresting me. I was
Yeah.
just like trying not to get shot.
Yeah.
I've talked. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and it even goes past that too. Even when you're out of uniform, people know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're out getting groceries, when you're out doing whatever, like people know who you are. And I think, you were telling a story before about the way we stand.
Yeah.
People just know he's a cop.
They do.
He looks like a cop, acts like a cop.
You guys, the
Stands
camo
like
is
one,
not really
it's
great.
just,
like,
yeah.
No,
I met a guy at jujitsu class, and that was I just looked over and I asked him politely what he did, but
Yeah.
it was the dude was like shaped like a V. His shoulders was as broad as a horse, and
Yeah.
the haircut doesn't. The haircut kind of sold it out too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I was telling him before we started, when I was up in the UP last week, I dropped a deer off to have it processed. And I was just standing there, and the lady says, "You're a cop, aren't you?" And I said, "How do you know that?" She goes, "I can just tell by the way you're standing." I'm like, "Well, you're right."
Yeah.
It's true.
So Matt, for you, like the idea that you were called to be God's servant
Mm-hmm.
and wield the sword, like, is this something that you considered as you step into? Because again, maybe a little bit more mature than most stepping into the law enforcement gig. Did you ever take that into consideration? What was the weight of that like?
Well, actually, I started out early in life kind of knowing that I wanted to be in law enforcement. Back in the 80s when I was in high school, we would do these it's not really a test, but like a thing you'd fill out, different questions. And it's supposed to tell you what type of job you were probably really interested in doing when you got older. And mine always came back as police officer. So I kind of, that kind of lit a fire way back then. Like I said, I've been in 3 different types of law enforcement jobs, all of them a little bit different. But yeah, it's a big responsibility. You have to remember that. One thing we were taught in recruit school, and it still sticks with me today, is that a lot of times the people we come in contact with, you're dealing with them on the worst day of their life.
Right.
So, you have to keep that in mind. It's just a regular day for us, but not for the people we deal with.
Right. Yeah, that's difficult in you guys' profession. I often think of like doctors and others that are dealing with people on the worst day of their lives, and to them there has to be some routine to it. Like this has to become kind of standard practice. Otherwise, like I couldn't handle that heartbreak every day. But for you guys, it's life and death.
Yeah.
It can be at any point. And my brother-in-law is a cop, and we talk often about just the fact that you can't take anything for granted in that line of work. And there's almost a cynicism that's necessary or builds if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine that that's easy.
No, you can go to work every day and be scared that you're going to die, or you can just put your faith in God, know that, He's watching over you and, go from there. And that's kind of how I look at it every day.
Awesome.
Yeah, we serve a sovereign God. And that's, my wife told me that multiple times. She's like, I gave you over to the Lord a long time ago, because if I had to think every minute of every day is he coming home, I'd be a mess. And so I just had to trust that the Lord was in control and that when it was your time to go, it was your time to go, and we're just going to support you the whole time until we can't anymore. So, that's a huge part of the process too, is knowing you have a support system. And that cynicism you talked about before is very real. When you see bad after bad after bad, all of a sudden you start to see people as bad and forgetting that not everybody is that. It's just that was a bad part and that was a bad mistake that they made, whatever the case may be. But the cynicism's real, and it's something we have to really protect against.
Yeah. And as he mentioned, you have to have your support system there. Mine is my wife for sure. Even going through recruit school, we'd get to use the phone maybe once a week for a few minutes, and I would call my wife. And there was times where I'm like, I don't really know if I want to do this. She used to say she would talk me off the bridge,
Right.
quite a few times. And, she had a group of women that prayed for me every day, going through it. So, she's 100% behind me. She just trusts that God's going to protect me. I'll fall back on my training I have. And so, yeah, you definitely need that support there.
It's a special kind of woman. I'll level with you. Like the idea that you accept what you're going to be in for, that's one thing. Hey, honey, you're going to come along with this. And yeah, there may be a day where I don't come home, or maybe a day, and honestly, everything you're bringing home. So let me ask you guys this, and there are a lot of connections to pastoral ministry, but honestly, it's a little bit more relatable on your side of the table than mine, I think, a lot of times. I struggle with, I have to be careful what I bring home, right? I get to deal with people on their worst days as well, oftentimes. A lot of the counseling and things that I support, I'm going to work with folks in the midst of some of the ugliest times, breaking marriages and moments that nobody really wants to relive.
Yeah.
Some of that I carry heavily, and I know that we lay that at the foot of the cross. You don't have to write in the emails about that. I'm aware. I still struggle with that. But my wife, I have to choose very wisely what I share with her and how much of that I allow to come home on my shoulders. Otherwise, I'm just not a great husband.
Yeah.
So was that something that your wives knew right off the bat? It sounds like almost inherently that they were built for this. Or is that something that they had to learn along the way?
Yeah, sometimes police officers are good at compartmentalizing things, kind of because the stuff you deal with is kind of crazy at times. When I first started, I thought, should I go home and tell my wife what I went through today, or do I just keep it to myself? I found for me, it was best just to talk to my wife about it, if I went through something difficult, so she could pray for me on it. So
that's awesome.
I did protect her from some things. I think for the most part, she knew what was going on. And even if she also knew when to press and when not to press.
Right.
So she could tell if I was going through something, and she would know, should I ask more questions or should I just let this kind of go and I'll hear about it in a couple days kind of thing. There's still stories that I'll bring up and she's like, I didn't know that. I'm like, well, I didn't tell you that because it was probably something you didn't really need to worry about at the time.
The day after seemed like a poor time
to share that. Right.
Yeah.
But she also knew when it was a big day, if there was a fight or, if guns were drawn or whatever, she knew those days because I come home in a lot different mood than a normal day.
Right.
If there is such a thing as a normal day, but
well,
you know what
not
I mean.
Usually.
Yeah. But she would know those things. And so she knew when to press and when not to press. But yeah, I agree. Having that support, because there's very few people that you can confide in who actually know and can walk through what you're doing. There's a reason that some of the best friends that I still have to this day were police officers, because that you've been through the same stuff. You've gone through the training, you've kicked down the same doors, you've walked in the same situations, you've done all these things together that as much as you or as close as you want to get with somebody else, you just can't because there's not that same level of trust there.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true for spouses as well. They kind of got together because they knew that there was a camaraderie there, that they were supporting their spouses, and they knew that there was more there than just the normal housewife role. And that's not to diminish that in any sense, but there's more there.
Yeah, there's a bond, a connection, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
My wife and I talk about this often. There are certain things I cannot understand. I don't care how much she tells me about her female anatomy and life and the way that her body works. I don't get it. I do not understand that. I can learn about it. I can have understanding of it. I don't understand.
Right.
I can't understand what it is to go to work as a police officer. Now, to be fair, just for giggles, I did go through pre-criminal justice at Ferris State. My goal was to become a cop, move through that, use it as a pendulum to end up as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. But after my, so many arrests, you get to a point where you're like, this probably isn't going to work out. I don't think they're going to accept me.
Yeah.
So I can't fathom what you guys do for work. I often struggle because my brother-in-law express to me when there is so much unrest or so much opposition to police these days, he's in a position where he has to still go to work every day. He knows that there's a good portion of the population that doesn't like him, trust him, that has an opinion of him that I used to have. This is the enemy as opposed to these are the peacemakers and the protectors. And he still has to do the job pretty much perfectly because there is a camera on his chest. There is a whole world watching. How do you deal with that type of pressure and make split-second decisions? I couldn't imagine that.
Can I tell a quick story?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I remember when I first went into civilian world out of police, and I remember coming home to my wife and saying, I don't understand how these people have a job, because they can mess up or they can forget to do something or they can miss a procedure, whatever. And it's like, oh, well, my bad. I got to figure that out. Whereas if we miss a procedure, someone walks, we lose our job. It's all over the news. Like there's no grace. It's either you do it right or you don't. And if you don't, there's a repercussion for that.
And the laws are constantly changing too. And that's one thing about this job.
Every year.
You have to keep up on everything because something you were doing maybe a year ago, you can't do anymore.
Right.
So you have to know that. You can't just play dumb and say, "Oh, I didn't know that."
Right.
You have to know it.
Yeah. Ignorance is not an excuse. And so, we had updates in Tennessee. I'm sure you do here. Updates every year to go over the new laws, the new procedures, all these things that are happening. And it's just, you have to know those things. And there's no room for error. There's no grace period. You just got to do it.
Yep. And not only if you mess up can you get in trouble with your department, but then you could be, sued also by that individual.
Right.
So there's always that, that I guess I'd say fear of it happening,
So walk with me here. How do you process that knowing so some of us just don't deal well under stress, right? Like I always think of pro athletes and this idea that like at the highest levels, it doesn't matter if you have a good day or a bad day. You're getting paid millions and millions of dollars. Like you catch the ball when it gets thrown to you. If you don't catch the ball, you don't get to play the game anymore. You guys, this is a little higher stakes. And like you said, there's a vast difference between the level of mistake acceptable in civilian life and when you are carrying a gun. Is that like, do you just have to set that aside and just do the job? Is it a prayer life? Is it a matter of like, hey, we do have this camaraderie? Like, how do you actually walk through that?
I guess I'll start. You can go after I'm done. I think God uniquely equips police officers to think quicker and be able to react quicker than I think most people. And it's not, again, to downplay others' decision-making processes, but there's three basic responses that we get in a stressful situation: flight, fight, or freeze.
Right.
And I think with most police officers, most of the time in the academy, you find out pretty quickly where people land.
Right.
So a lot of people who think they would be good police officers get into stressful situations and realize very quickly that it isn't for them. I know when I went through, I worked for the State Police of Pennsylvania for a short period of time. When we went through that academy, they built in a 40% attrition rate in their academy classes because they knew that they were going to lose that many people. So 4 out of 10 people are going to be booted from the class. And they do things intentionally to put you in those stressful situations to see, do you have the mental fortitude to go through these situations and get through to the next thing and make a decision in a stressful situation. And so I think that God truly gifts people, and I think the same is true for military as well, gifts people to work through those stressful situations and be able to make a good thought-based decision and then act on that decision and not freeze when things happen. Have you seen that too in academy classes and things?
I agree with you. It's the same way when I went through the military, and I mean, when you've got guys in your face screaming at you and stuff, it's not because they don't like you. They're trying to put you in a stressful situation and see how you're going to handle that. So, and you have to just fall back on your training a lot of times, I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, there's been times where I'm going to a call, you're running lights and siren and, you're nervous. You don't know what you're getting into.
Right.
One thing I was taught back when I went through the academy was sometimes you may show up on scene and not even really know what to do, but you have to act like you do. Right. You have to get there and take charge and, quell the situation. And then you can maybe go call a buddy and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you recommend? What next step do I do? And guys will help you out with that. So. And as you do it longer, you learn that stuff, Yeah. I remember the first few times I would go to a call, you're doing 130 down the freeway to something, and you're super nervous, and you're gripping the wheel, death grip, and now I'm going to stuff and I'm holding on like with one hand, it's just like you're just so used to doing it, right. And you may show up on scene. I've showed up before where like my legs are shaking and somebody said, are you cold? But you just get that adrenaline dump sometimes, and you can just feel it like through your whole body. It's a weird feeling.
I remember the first rollover crash with entrapment I went to. I was baby cop at the time. Yeah. But it was the first one I went to, and I got there, you're running lights and sirens and everything, and I get there, and then everybody looks at you like, well, what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this.
I'm sure an adult will be here soon.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for somebody else. Well,
Yeah.
you're it. You're the person that has to make the decision.
I'm going to wing it for now.
Right. Yeah. So, it's one of those, what's the next best thing, that we can get through the situation.
Yeah.
But it's a learning process. I remember the first time that I ran lights and sirens or something. I was still in the training program. I was still under an FTO. And I remember my FTO saying, so what did you see when you were driving here? And I thought back and I'm like, I don't remember anything. All I saw was straight ahead.
Wait, I was driving?
Right. And he's like, well, we're going to have to fix that. Like, you got to slow yourself down, slow your brain down. It's a trained process that you have to do to get yourself to just slow yourself down and take a look around of what's happening and not get so wrapped up in one thing.
You can't get that tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Whether it's going on the road fast to something or you're on the scene dealing with somebody that's extremely irate, you can't just focus on that person. You're still having to watch what's going on around you,
Right.
So what I'm hearing you guys say is from God's original equipping, like he puts some people in position and he's making sure they have the pieces they need, but there's training, there is support, there is experience. All these things play into the ability to be able to deal with this almost like zero grace lifestyle that you live.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that impact your ability to be able to give and receive grace? And we're going to play with this for a little while here because God gives us this unique view of himself, right? He is a God of full justice. He is a God of grace. And most of us, if we're honest, we read the Old Testament, we see justice God, really good. And then we read the New Testament, we see grace God, really good. And then we're like, I don't think these books go together. And we're like, wait a minute. That's the beauty of our God. But you guys are in a position where you are literally justice. You are commissioned to be the justice here on earth. How do you balance grace into that in your own life? And we'll take this one at a time. In your own life, first off, or we'll go on the job first off. How do you balance grace into your job?
I try to show grace to everybody that I deal with. Sometimes you deal with. Most of the people are great to deal with, but you always get those knuckleheads, that it's just hard to deal with them. And sometimes I have to remember that, they're a human also. And if that was the only person on the earth, Christ would have still died for them, So you just have to take that into consideration that you're still dealing with, with people. And I try to show a little grace, to everybody I deal with. Some people, they're just not going to accept it,
So while I'm asking Caleb that, I'm going to ask you to consider, can you think of a situation, a story, maybe a time where that grace has had to come into play as you're dealing with somebody and it panned out as like, hey, I needed to show grace here and I learned, I don't know, anything that kind of lends some exposure to that. And Caleb can kind of give us his definition while you're thinking. Buy you a second.
Yeah. We, as police officers, we have a lot of latitude with what we want to we can charge with or not charge with. I would say troopers may be different. I think they probably have a higher number than we did on traffic stops, but I would say probably 70% plus of the people I pulled over didn't get a ticket. A lot of times it was a warning, like, hey, let's slow down, make sure you're not doing what you're doing.
I'm the same way, actually.
Yeah, okay. And there's this I don't know who started it, but there's this quota thing out there. It doesn't exist. I'm just telling you now. It doesn't
just because
exist.
it's close to the end of the month doesn't mean we have so many tickets we can rate.
It doesn't.
It's not true.
That's a bunch of nonsense.
I may have perpetuated that. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, just putting that out there for
it's
everybody.
not like we get extra in our paycheck because I wrote 100 tickets instead of.
You don't get a commission?
No,
unfortunately.
No. Hard no on that one. But there's a lot of grace that we can give with stuff like that. And I think a lot of times when we run into people, it might be the first time they've ever seen grace given to them. Mm-hmm. And so they run into these problems where they've dealt with just evil for so long, and then they meet somebody who has something bigger than themselves, and that is, for us, it's God. We have that faith, we have that hope, and so they get to see that grace through us. And I mean, there's countless times where I've talked to people who have just been struggling, and they don't know where to turn, they don't know what to do. And then they get somebody who just listens to them. And when they feel that you care about them, all of a sudden they'll start opening up a lot more about, well, what do I do with this? Or how can I fix this? And that's where, we couldn't initiate conversations about our faith with others, but if they asked, we could say as much as we wanted. And so as soon as they started asking those things, we could have all those conversations about, hey, are you involved with a church? Do you believe in Jesus at all? You know, he's changed my life. He can change yours. We could say all those things as soon as they started to initiate the conversation. So a lot of times I would see conversations like that happen just by, again, showing grace to that person.
Right.
Sometimes we're a counselor as much as we are a cop. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's times where you show up on a scene and somebody just wants somebody to talk to, you know, and sometimes that you just have to do that, you know.
Do you have the repeat callers that you just know when it comes up on the screen, you're like,
oh yeah,
all right, this lady or this guy just needs somebody to talk to today,
yes.
and I'm going to be that person today.
Yes, yeah. A lot of times, you know, they're maybe dealing with mental illness or something, and, you know, we had a guy this last summer, he was calling 4 or 5 times a day, you know, for just crazy stuff, and it's like, you know, it's nothing, but you still got to show up and just maybe just talk to him, you know.
See, this is not the picture of law enforcement that I had in my head for most of my life. It just isn't.
Yeah.
I was convinced that you guys were the fun suckers and that whatever I was doing, you were going to try to catch me at, and that was really all you existed to do. And, you know, you're just going to be petty. No, I'll be honest. I don't think all cops are the same. Anyway, I think any group of people is the same. And I mean, it's encouraging to hear men of faith talk about, hey, this is how I've seen God's grace play itself out in my life and in my story and in my role and my job.
Yeah.
So, Matt, I kind of asked you, is there a time in which you remember grace playing into kind of a situation real distinctly?
You know, it happens actually quite often. I mean, there's times where I'll make a traffic stop, and before I even get up to the window, I got somebody that's cussing at me, you know, and wanting to know why you pulled them over and this and that. And they just want to argue with you and everything. So I'll get their information, go back to the car, make sure they don't have warrants or anything like that. And they think they're getting a ticket, you know, and a lot of times they'll be like, you know what, I'm not giving this guy a ticket because he obviously doesn't like police officers. Maybe I'll turn that around a little bit and show him that, you know, we're not all out just to get you, you know, and walk back up and say, hey, here's your information. Hope you have a better day. And they look at you like they can't believe that they didn't just get a ticket, you know.
I can't believe they didn't get a ticket. I'm going to level with you. I'm a cop. I walk up to the window and you're cursing at me. I'm like, hold up. I think I can find a few more things wrong with this car.
Here's the thing, though. A lot of times, unless there was something obnoxious or glaring that required a ticket, I would make a decision of whether I'm going to give somebody a ticket before I ever walked up to the car. So I knew when I pulled that car over, I'm going to let them know that their taillight's out. I'm going to let them know their light over the license plate is out or they're speeding or whatever. I almost always made that decision beforehand because I didn't want to be dictated by somebody else's bad day.
Gotcha.
Yep.
I mean, is that...
Well, yeah, me too. And then there's sometimes I'm like, oh, this guy's getting a ticket. He's doing 25 over the speed limit. And then you get up there and you talk to him and you realize this person's just having a bad day. You know. And so there's times I actually will change my mind just after talking to them. You know, there's a lot of times where I'll pull somebody over and, you know, let's say it's a single mom. She's got 3 crying kids in the back. You know, she's barely got enough money to scrape by. And I think to myself, yeah, I could give her a ticket, but is it really going to help out her situation? Now she's got to go pay $120 that she probably can't afford. Right. You know, her car's barely running. Or could I just talk to her and make it a learning experience? So,
well, that's real because one of the reasons, you know, I always joke that I stepped out of the criminal justice program because I got in so much trouble. Timing actually is a little different than that. And a lot of it came down to the fact that I didn't believe in the current system of, you know, it was at that point in criminal justice school, it seemed very punitive. It was, we're going to punish you until you stop doing the thing. Now, I'm not totally against that. And I think Scripture actually gives us some pretty clear guidelines for it. But I also looked at this idea of rehabilitation and I was like, I don't know if that works. I just had not seen it work in my own life. So I found myself at odds with the system and didn't believe that it actually worked and didn't believe that it was set up to help people get better. And now, at this point, I think between the ages 16 and 22, I'd been arrested 6 times. I look back and look at my record now.
You have a mugshot we could look at?
That's actually funny. I
would
would have hair
for this episode.
We don't even put a blurb. It's just marked convict interviews 2 police officers. But what was wild to me is I remember going, I'll never get out of this. But between the fines and losing my license and everything else, and I was at the low end of like getting myself in trouble. Like I a lot of them, but it's all little petty stuff. But it started to build up and I couldn't dig out. And I'm like, this isn't set up to make me, like, it's forcing me to make choices that are only getting worse. So I struggled with that a lot. And it sounds to me like, police officers that understand the discretion that they have, that choose to use that and see humans, can make a huge difference in this. Have you seen that to be the case? Like, honest, and Matt, I'll recuse you from this question because you're currently doing the job. Caleb, like, when you're in that, are you fully bought into the system? Like, you believe in everything you're doing, or is it hard because day to day you're going? And maybe that's an off-limits question. You can pass any of my questions.
That's a loaded question. Okay, I'm glad you recused Matt from that. He shouldn't have to answer that question.
I can answer a little bit.
I believe in the concepts of what we are trying to do. I think there are better ways that we can do it. The problem is you can't. Every time you write a one size fits all, it doesn't fit everybody.
Right.
And so there is no perfect way for a criminal justice system to work. It's impossible because every time you think you have an answer, something else comes up that is going to make it obsolete or doesn't work or whatever. I think the biggest maybe thing that I saw was just the lack of staffing to do a lot of things that would have been good for people. So I have a friend who just went through all her social work stuff. And so a big thing that we run into, at least I did, was especially in the lower income areas, were kids who just weren't taken care of.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had all these resources that you wanted to give them, but we didn't have the staffing to do that. We didn't have the ability to take them to the next level and provide for these kids the way that I wanted to, or the way that I think Jesus would want us to, because we don't have that staffing. So, I think in concept, I think that the criminal justice system is relatively good. But I think there are things that can be improved on. And I think that if anybody says that there isn't, I don't know if they have a truly open eye to what's happening.
Right.
But I think a lot of it just boils down to resources, money, and the people to do it. And I think that's honestly true for just about everything that you do. I mean, look at the church, right? If you had unlimited resources, think of all the things you could do, right?
Oh, yeah. There's plenty of people that are pretty convinced the church is doing a terrible job at a lot of things.
Right. And so
you're not always wrong.
Well, right. And so, I think that there's things we can improve on for sure. It's one of those things you have to work with what you have.
Really well said. Thank you. And for what it's worth, yeah, I know that's a tough question. And I think that you answered it exceptionally well, because we don't want to give an impression that there's any agency out there, any man-made anything that's perfect, right? We're trying to work within God's constructs, and He's put people in place, but it's people and limited numbers of peoples and resources. Matt, you did want to touch this one?
Well, and maybe this
I'm not getting you fired.
No. I would just say that, yeah, there's some I guess you could say rules or laws out there that some of them I don't really agree with, but I still have to enforce them.
Right.
So, and I won't go into more detail than that.
Yeah.
If I was retired, I'd probably say a little more. But
we'll
I still
catch
got a few
you on
years
that
to go. Yeah.
9 years.
There were some things, that my wife and I talked about that if they ever became law, that I'd be like, all right, I'm out.
Right.
I can't do this knowing what I know and believing in what I believe. If they were to say that, you're not allowed to gather with other believers at a church, I'm out. I'm not enforcing that law.
I 100% agree with that.
And they did a little bit of that. You saw that in Canada a little bit, especially during COVID, where they would shut places down and they would arrest people for gathering. I'm not doing that.
But you also saw officers that said, nope, I'm out. And they did pay the price of that. My brother said for years, like, if and when those lines are drawn, most of the police force goes, no, we're not willing to enforce that.
Right.
And that is kind of the great equalizer, right? That people's hearts, God's law is written upon our hearts, and every officer, whether they're a believer or not, has that law written on their hearts. And at some point, we come back to there is a moral law. Yeah. There is something beyond man's law and the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And all those are great conversations, but God's justice will be served, and I don't want to be on the other side of it. I really don't.
Yeah. COVID was a crazy time to be a police officer because there was a lot of stuff that was out there that weren't laws, that were mandates. I totally disagreed with.
Right.
And you're getting sent to these calls where people are violating these things, and yeah, I have to go and do it.
Yeah.
And I don't always agree with it, but we have a lot of discretion too. So,
Yeah.
It's not like I have to write somebody a ticket if,
I can't imagine what you guys
circumstance.
went through. I know what the church dealt with in that time period and how difficult you couldn't please anybody, and every decision we made, we were all ignorant to a point, right? We're trying to figure this out in real time.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're trying to seek God's will in it, right? The church by and large is trying to seek God's will in it. But there were things that we did that I look back and I'm like, we would have never done that again had we known. I think that, again, comes back to that idea of grace.
Yeah. We were basically not even like doing traffic stops during that time, pretty much. I mean, I went through recruit school during the whole COVID thing. So we actually got sent home for 6 weeks and did it on Zoom, and everybody's like, oh, that must have been awesome. Get to do a class on Zoom. I hated Zoom. I absolutely hated it. You had to get up at 5 a.m. at your house and go do your PT and log it in, what you did and everything. I ran this far, whatever. It was tough. I was actually ready to go back to the academy.
Oh, I bet.
But I talked to some of the guys that were working the road during that time, and they were sitting on the freeway and not making stops because they didn't want you having a lot of contact with people. And you were pretty much just waiting for the radio if there was like a serious call that came out, a priority call or something.
Right.
So it was kind of crazy,
Yeah. So let's flesh out a little bit more of this justice and grace piece, because even as we're talking about this, it is very much coming back to the idea that God's grace is what allows us to do what we're doing. And you guys have had to learn to practice that in a zero mistake place. But you're also meant to be justice. And we don't always get to make the rules. I think this is one of the big connecting points to me. Police or law enforcement as a whole, you are given a certain set of laws that you have to abide by and enforce. Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Yeah.
And we end up in a position where, as God's people, He has given us a law. He's also shown us grace.
Mm-hmm.
And most of our lives is this tension between trying to abide by God's law because we know it's what's best for us, right? That's the other part of this. Like most laws, the general benefit of the doubt here. Most laws are created for the benefit of people, right? God's law is for our benefit. God doesn't, I say this often, God doesn't benefit from anything, us abiding by His law. He is God. He doesn't really need me to behave. He gave it to me for me. But not everybody's ever going to do that, right?
Right.
So as the enforcer of justice on this earth, whether you agree or disagree with the law, how do you draw that line in the sand? Like when you're using these discretionary moments, when you meet somebody on their worst day, on these other things, like how do you draw that line and know where the letter of the law and the spirit of the law come into play?
I think the more or the longer you're in it, the easier that gets. I remember, I was a baby cop. It was letter of the law. And so you broke the law, you got a ticket. You broke the law, you got arrested. You stole this, you went to jail. As you progress further in your career, so I did 16 years on the street, 4 years I taught in the academy. So year 16 on the street was a lot different than year 1 on the street. And so, I think a lot of that just comes in with your maturity to know that it's not a personal attack against you. They're not breaking the law to hurt you per se. And so, I think a lot of it is just as you age into this, that grace piece comes in slowly, and you just learn how to deal with those kinds of things. I think the same is true for a believer, right? So, as you become a believer, you read the Bible and you think, oh my word, all these rules, like this is crazy. But then as you mature, you realize that, well, yeah, they're not necessarily rules. They're guidelines to say this is how you should be living your Christian life and walking in your faith. And if you do these things, all of a sudden the other stuff really doesn't matter as much because everything you're doing is pointing towards Jesus, is pointing towards what you believe. And so what you thought were rules were actually things you shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And if you're doing the right things, then it doesn't matter anyways. Right. So I don't know if that answered that question or not, but I think it got easier the longer you're in it. At least for me, it did.
I like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So Matt, how How did you begin to parse that out? I'm sure Caleb laid out, it's time, it's experience, it's maturing in this. You came in a little bit more mature than most, at least into the state police gig.
Yeah.
Where did you draw the line on the spirit and the letter of the law? Like, I remember this conversation with my brother-in-law, and I loved it because he was a younger guy, came out of the academy, he's learning it, and he's fleshing out what you're saying, and he's been told this, he's been taught this, right, in a classroom setting. And then he's on the street, and then he's telling me stories about how it plays out. And it's wild to me because I see him as a kid, like he was a young dude when he came in. And he's trying to explain to me, like, he meets these people on the street, and they're selling drugs, and they're doing the stuff, and he's going, but now I see their humanity, and I want good for them. And the cynicism, fighting all those other pieces. But he's going, the letter of the law takes me down a road that I don't want to. The spirit of the law, but there is a hard line in the sand of, but you've run into this.
Yeah, there are, and Matt, you can answer this question. So there are certain things that it was letter of the law every time. Mm-hmm. So selling drugs, you're going to jail.
Right.
I don't have patience for that.
You beat your wife, you're going to jail.
You beat your wife, you're going to jail. DUIs were a big thing for me. I lost a great friend of mine, partner of mine, was hit by a DUI driver while on duty and died. Mm. DUIs are not something I mess with. You drink, we have way too many resources out there for you to get drunk and drive. Call an Uber, call a friend, but you're not drinking and driving. So there's certain things that it didn't matter. You're getting arrested, you're going to jail, you're getting a ticket. Though there are certain things out there.
Yeah, everything is trying to think of what I want to say here. It's just kind of like case-by-case basis, really. I mean, as far as what you're dealing with.
Gotcha.
Like he said, if it's a drunk driver, yeah, you're going to jail. I'm not going to let you go down the road and, hit some family head on, Right. I don't care if you're 100 yards from your driveway. You shouldn't have been out on the road driving,
right.
I don't know if I can really answer better than what he did, to be honest with you.
I think you guys both answered it really well, because there's a lot of people out there that right now that probably have a mentality that I did. Come on, man, I'm 100 yards. Like, I obviously did it well. He didn't.
Can't you just give me a ride home? Right. Yeah, 20, 30 years ago, that was probably the
That's
case.
What happened, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Things have changed a lot,
Mm-hmm. And again, to Caleb's point, there are so many resources, man. You made that choice.
Right.
Yep.
And honestly, even our listeners, I hope they're hearing this, because I'm still dealing with the DUI on my record. I'm not proud of that. It's funny. That's the last background check I did. It comes through and it's like, yep, still there. Mm-hmm. And I think back to myself and all the ignorant thoughts I had in regard to that. They were all about me. See, I love what you're saying, because it brings me to the definition of law enforcement that I see God's word used most often. It's peacekeeper. It isn't a matter of, hey, we're out there to bully people, to do things, like all those things I wanted to convince myself cops were.
No.
God has put people on this earth to make sure to protect and to serve. I mean, Jesus talked more about serving than most things.
Yeah.
And to protect us. I'm grateful now for the fact that the world needed to be protected from the man I could have become had I not hit some walls and been put in the back of that cop car a few times. And frankly, none of us want to be on the other side of that. We just don't like it when we made a mistake.
Right.
So this idea of grace plays in as a necessity, but at the same time, grace was never given to us, as Paul says, so that we could thumb our nose at the law. It was so that we understood that even after our failings, that God still loved us.
And there's consequences, whether it's you breaking the law or you're breaking God's law, man's law or God's law. I mean, yeah, God can forgive you of your sin, what you did, but there's still going to be consequences because of that choice, and the same with, breaking man's law. You can say you're sorry and you can serve your time, in jail or whatever the punishment is, but there's always consequences for those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's funny. Sometimes we distill Christianity down to this idea that grace means that there is no impact of the things. And it's like, no, let me help you understand. The consequences of my pre-Jesus life still hit me to this day. I still have to put on every one of my background checks, all my arrests, and that's a super embarrassing conversation to have. I'm grateful for tab folk that still love me and allow me to preach God's word to them. But that's still an impact. Mm-hmm. And God didn't ask us He didn't give us scot-free, because he understands that those are the things that mold us and draw us closer to him. I'm convinced that God's law, and he uses man's law oftentimes to draw us back. I think you guys do a work and have done work that helps us see the error of our ways, right? The law was meant in Scripture to show us our need for Jesus and for grace. Sometimes it's a really good place in the back of a cop car to learn that. So I'm going to share a quick story, and then I'm going to give you guys kind of the wrap-up moment. But this is probably one of the most embarrassing things I confess. So about 16 years old, I'm stumbling into a church. It's a little Pentecostal church, cute girl. Seemed like a great idea. But I'm learning about this God that today I call my Savior. And about that same time, I got arrested for shoplifting from a Walmart. Maybe I shouldn't have said that because I'm pretty sure they told me I'm lifetime banned.
Lifetime banned. They always say that.
And I was like, I don't know. Like, you got my picture at every Walmart?
No.
But I get arrested, and I'm talking to the security guard, and I'm trying to talk my way out of it, and I'm not getting out of it. Like, this guy is not going to show grace. Grace was not a word he used. But I get in the back of the cop car, and I remember going, I'm a Christian. I know this. I'm going to tell him, and I start trying to talk to him about God, purely as a get out of the backseat of this cop car moment. It was the most pathetic attempt at using God to get me out of the trouble. And I think that's the analogy for many of us throughout our entire life. We want God to get us out of trouble, right? We like the idea of salvation because it gets us out of the consequences. Mm-hmm. But without the justice piece, without that other side of this, it doesn't work. Because had that cop been like, oh, sweet,
oh, you're a Christian?
I promise you, I do not quit doing bad things at that point. Now, I didn't quit doing bad things for a long time afterward, but I still look back. If that cop ever listens, thank you. I'd actually be grateful to 5 out of 6 of those officers that arrested me. The 6th one was a little dicey. I'm grateful because they were steering me back. The law was used to point me to my need for Jesus. And for you guys, that's oftentimes what I think you get to do. So this is kind of where I want to land is, where have you seen God use you in those moments to help direct somebody back to him, whether directly or like you get to hear the story later? Like, just share with me a little bit of the wins, because I know that the work that you guys have done didn't always have wins. And yeah,
I always consider it a win when I give somebody a ticket and they tell me thank you. Doesn't always happen, but no. You want to go first? Or?
Sure. Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking a little bit, one of the coolest things I think I ever saw, and let me back up a little bit. People know that there's a difference between you and I and those who aren't believers. There's a hope there. There's a peace. There's, I think, a joy that doesn't come naturally. It has to come supernaturally. And so one of the privileges and probably the greatest weights I had the last couple of years that I was a police officer was to be the death notification officer on our team.
Yeah, that's a tough job.
It's awful because you get both ends of the spectrum. You get those who have no hope in Jesus and who are devastated, who fall on the ground and are just wailing because they know there's nothing there, and they've lost their loved one forever. Then you have the other side who are still sad. I mean, obviously this is a big deal, but there's a hope there. And I remember going to this house. It was actually my last notification I had to make. Went to the house, and we had gotten call that so Route 40 goes from Nashville all the way down to Memphis. And so we have a lot of commuters that go from Nashville to Memphis, and they would take that trip. It's a brutal road. But there was a mom who was driving from Nashville to Memphis to work, and you've seen interstates where there's a big median in between them, and it's just open grass. Yeah. Well, she was driving, and a wheel came off of a tractor trailer, and it rolled across the median and head on her and killed her instantly as she was going the opposite direction. The odds of that happening, I don't even know. Yeah. Probably not even calculable. But she ended up dying at the scene. And so I had to go and tell this dad and the daughter and the son, both of them were teenagers, that their mom had died. And I remember them just sitting there and just sitting on the couch and they were sad, they were crying. They didn't really know like how to process this. They went from I talked to mom this afternoon to it was weird that I couldn't get a hold of her later when I texted her. Usually she texts me right back and I couldn't get a hold of her. So I thought something was weird. Then I saw you guys show up on the porch in full dress and like something was off. I knew it was off. So you went from all of that, but then it came full circle later. And the whole point of the story is I taught criminal justice at a high school for a couple years after I left police. And that girl, the teenage daughter that I gave this death notification to that her mom had died, shows up in my class. She had no idea I was a teacher. She had no idea of any of that, but she walked into my class. As soon as she saw me, she broke down. I knew exactly who she was. I'm like, oh my word, this is terrible. Like the last thing this girl needs is for, her to come into class every day, see me, be reminded of this. So, I went right over to the principal of the school and I'm like, listen, if this girl wants to drop the class, let her drop the class. And she came to me a couple days later and she said, I want to be in your class because you had so much hope when you came and told me about my mom dying that it made me want to get back to church. It made me want to go back. And so right now, I'm at youth group in this church in Nashville. I'm going to this youth group, and I'm a Christian, and I'm growing in my faith. And it was all because of how you came in and shared your hope with me about there is something more to life than just what we're living now. So for me, like that's what made being a cop so worth it. Like that's the kind of stuff. Yeah, there's there's reports and there's crashes and there's all this stuff that we do, but like that is what makes being a cop worth it for me. And that I will forever remember that. I'll forever remember that conversation. That was kind of, I guess, the pinnacle of my career as a police officer.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
I had a situation a couple years ago, Christmas Eve. I get a call for a suicide. Show up there and Dad killed himself in the living room by the Christmas tree with Mom and the little girl in the next room. You show up on that stuff and it's like, what do you do? And sometimes you just got to hug the person and just tell them, things will work out, I heard later on through the grapevine that she had made a statement that I appreciate the troopers that were there because they didn't know what to say, but they just gave me a hug,
Yeah, I mean, what do you say when you have a 12-year-old that kills themselves?
Yeah.
Like, what do you say to a parent? You can't say anything. You just got to be there. You just gotta be a presence that they know they can come to, that they can hug, that they can just be there.
And training doesn't prepare you for that stuff,
No.
You learn way more. I mean, I learned so much more once I got on the road on my own than I ever did through the academy.
Yeah.
Because now you're on your own and you're dealing with these situations. You got to figure them out,
Right.
And it just comes with time too. But there's some of the stuff out there you're just not prepared for it, And sometimes it's just a matter of, like I said, giving somebody a hug, and just being there for them. So,
yeah.
Well done, fellas, because it's one of those other unique crossovers between our roles. I can tell you that the first time I sat by a bedside, I had no idea what to do. But like you said earlier, God equips you in the moment for the hug, for the caring statement, for the hope that you may not even have known that you brought that day.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of God's grace through his Holy Spirit, in those moments, we have nothing to offer. Because there is nothing beyond hope, beyond what God has given us that can be offered in these moments. And we see people, like we said earlier, in their worst moments, on their worst days. That's something we both get to do. And it's a gift. It really is. Genuinely, I look at it now and I go, man, some of the greatest moments I have seen have come through the worst tragedies that God has allowed me to see just how it's going to work out.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't want just a regular job going and punching a clock and doing the same thing every day. I've done that before.
Right.
I find that highly boring. I love getting in my patrol car every day, and you don't know what you're getting
Let's
into, what you're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
You may just sit on the freeway and run radar and make stops that day, or you may be going to a homicide or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's one thing too that a lot of people think that state troopers, they think of it as like highway patrol.
Right.
It's not like that. I mean, we're not just making stops. that's a very small part of it.
Right.
We do our own investigations, whatever it is that we run into. So, and I didn't realize that maybe going into the job. I didn't realize how much paperwork there was going to be. I'll be honest with you. You get a drunk driver and you're 3-4 hours of paperwork.
That's not part of the marketing for like, hey, come join the state
No.
police squad. You'll get to do plenty of paperwork.
Yeah, I mean, you make your traffic stops and all that, but there's a lot more to it than just that, And that's what I enjoy. I enjoy every day going and not knowing what I'm going to get into. Some of the stuff you don't want to get into, but I find it exciting. It's not, just the same thing day after day. Every day is different.
Yeah.
Just when you think you've seen the craziest thing in the world, you go to work the next day and you find something to beat that.
It is funny. Every Christmas, depending on when you're listening, this podcast will land just a little before Thanksgiving. And all I can think is, every holiday I sit around and the person I probably relate to the most, and we have the most back and forth stories, is my brother-in-law, who is a Grand Rapids SWAT, detective. Like, we're sitting there talking and it's like, yeah, we wake up every morning and have no idea what the job's going to look like.
Yeah.
And both of us can agree there's far too much paperwork in it. Like, pastoral ministry should not have this much admin, but it does.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people, they think, oh, we're in northern Michigan. There's not a lot that goes on. I used to think that too.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. When you get in law enforcement, that curtain comes back and you realize how much stuff actually goes on around here.
Dude, we live in the Wild West.
Yeah, but most people have no idea.
No.
The types of things that go on around here.
Mm-hmm. You guys remember the Florida Man headlines?
Oh, yeah.
Like, they became kind of a running meme of like Florida Man, blah, blah, blah. Like, Buckley's got the same thing. Like, you search it out and it's like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that's happened in this little tiny town.
I've been called up to Buckley many times. Be sick everywhere.
Not once for me. I just want to put it out there. It's been a lot of years. I might have thrown myself under the bus here, but...
Yeah, we were watching your house one night. You didn't know about it.
Probably not a bad idea. Ziano's going to be a problem, so... Well, fellas, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for just being able to come on, be genuine, be forthright. I think that if nothing else, that passage talks a little bit about we can be afraid of God's justice, the people that He's put. And for me, this has been a good reminder. Like, it's been a lot of years since I've separated from that old part of me, but there's still I think this is good therapy for me. I hope our listeners also enjoyed it. For me, I'm going, man, I'm just grateful that there are men of faith on the police force out there in this world being what God has called them to be. And there's Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." And I think to myself, like, maybe that doesn't apply to every officer of the law, but those that are carrying out God's justice, God's mercy, God's grace in this world. That's them. That's you guys. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for the work that you do, that you've done, whether it's at Lake Ann today or it's, on the force still. I'm immensely grateful because I think God's grace is shown only perfectly alongside His justice. Mm-hmm.
Can I say something?
By all means.
When I was younger, I used to think, I want to serve God in some capacity. And I used to think, is that going to be in Africa, living in some mud hut somewhere and talking to the locals? God put me in this job for a reason, and this is my mission field. So I find it exciting, Yeah. It's not for everybody for sure, but I think God called me to this and I'm happy I'm here.
Yeah. Because not all of us are built to be cops or live in Africa or
pastors.
Be pastors. Like, you pick
Yep.
it, and God's wired us for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Caleb, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I always thought that I'd be involved with law enforcement somehow, but I never knew how. I always had a reverence for military. My grandfather was in the military. I didn't know what that would look like for me moving forward. I thought I wanted to do military. And then, after we got married with kids and all that kind of stuff, we want to be deployed and all that. But no matter, where you are as a listener, like, it doesn't matter if you're 48. It doesn't matter if you're 21. It doesn't matter where you are in life. God has a plan for you. And being open and receptive to what that plan is, like, just go for it. Don't be afraid. Just go for it. And if you're spending time with Him, if you have a relationship with Him, the question I get a lot of times at the camp is, well, what's the will of God for my life? Okay, well, here's the will of God. Have a relationship with Him, be intimate with Him, everything that you do for him, and everything else will work itself out. And that is the will of God. So, God created us all differently. Pastors, teachers, cops, working in the food industry, doing whatever, a truck driver, it doesn't matter. God needs everybody to do their part. And so I would just encourage you, if you're listening, find out what that is and don't be afraid to go for it.
God can use you anywhere you're at.
Yep.
Amen.
Amen, fellas. Yeah, on that note, I'm not saying anything else. Tab family, I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. This was a remarkable look behind the curtain. Two men that I have a great deal of respect for, and some great advice there at the end to just remember that God has something for everybody here. So I hope that you will share this with everybody you know on all the social media outlets and all of the things. Like, subscribe, and do the stuff that makes podcasts more accessible to other people. We're not looking for popularity. We're looking for God's word to get out. And if you think that this can do that for somebody, make sure they get a copy of it. But until next time, this is Matt, Caleb, and Martin signing off.